Xavier. Ramey is the Chief Executive of Justice Informed. Justice Informed is a consulting agency that helps to increase the impact of corporate social responsibility. And he's also just an activist, a mentor to many, and someone who's on the front lines and serious about getting us free. So I appreciate you for taking some time this afternoon, brother. No doubt. Now tell us more about Justice Informed. First of all, congratulations. 6 months old at the time of this recording and already breaking records.
Yeah.
But what does the organization do?
So Justice Informed is a company based here in Chicago. We serve to essentially create spaces, environments, and cultures within institutions across the country that are more ambitious in their civic regard and effect for people of color, people of marginalized identity, to make their internal spaces, places where people want to work, as well as to make them the communities, places where people want to live. So we work with everything from corporations around their diversity, equity, inclusion work, and that's their internal strategies, as well as their corporate social responsibility work, that's their external strategies. We also work with nonprofits around their back office work, messaging for dignity, a lot around their diversity, equity, and inclusion work, primarily with boards. There's a lot of problems right now in nonprofits, given that a lot of boards of directors are primarily white. They're often very wealthy. The clients are often people of color. And the disconnect now that people have rights and agency and people of color are wanting to have voice. They've always wanted to have voice, but now they have the political and the social capital to do so. It requires people who are adept at creating a smooth transition for that, while still holding the line for justice in those conversations. And then finally, we work with foundations. We're trying to push more and more foundations to look at a trifold way of looking at their investments, their engagement and how they fund, and then finally how they communicate about what these issues are. Because often these foundations are the spaces that create the language around what's happening in the hood and why it's the hood. And they either create a more ambitious language and a more true language, or they gloss over it.
So what are some of the challenges then that advocacy groups face, especially in this current political climate? Because we talk a lot about keeping elected officials accountable after the voting process is done. Organizations like yours helps to make that a reality, but oftentimes you guys face opposition from that same process. So what are some of the challenges that you face?
So first, I just want to be clear. Most people don't support advocacy groups. Let's just be very clear about that. If we're talking about political organizing, we're talking about direct action campaigns, we're talking about politics as we know it. There are many corporations that try to stay out of that. Now, we know that lobbying exists, though. And so in that, they're engaging in the political atmosphere, right? But when it comes to, for instance, nonprofits, like Colin Kaepernick has the Know Your Rights Camp, right? That's an advocacy organization that's working really hard to educate young people of color about what their rights are and what their opportunities are as it relates to the effect of state violence in their life. If Colin Kaepernick didn't have the money he has, I don't know that they'd be as well funded as they are. There's not too many corporations that are looking to support those types of things. They'll support kids' after-school reading programs. They'll support tutoring initiatives for their employees to go into communities of color that might be affected by state violence, to teach kids English and math and these types of things. But supporting them as it relates to how we the people, the government, which is we the people, affect those communities is something that doesn't receive as much support. So I just want to make that clear. In terms of how they're being targeted right now, one, we have to look at the political landscape. So one of the most prominent advocacy groups in the U.S., of course, is the ACLU. The ACLU of Illinois here in Chicago is a really powerful one. We also have a lot of labor unions that work to ensure that people have rights and equity inside the workplace. It also depends on the labor union, how they're moving with that. Some of them actually, I think, hinder progress and justice, but many of them are fighting to ensure that workplaces are equitable. The challenge gets when you get to the intersectional argument with labor. For instance, the Fraternal Order of Police, being the union for the police, that space, they're protecting the rights for police to have their jobs, keep their jobs, and stay in their jobs with as little friction as possible. Which has a deleterious effect on the communities often in the agency that they're requesting or demanding in their rights for accountability against police who have committed misconduct or who have shot people or who have harmed people or just cussed some mother out as she was in her house. These types. So it's a tricky thing. And so a lot of institutions try to stay away from it. But what I'm seeing is there are more people that are looking to engage, but it really comes down to how are we amplifying the fact that advocacy groups are a form of civic engagement that is absolutely necessary. It's not something that it'd be nice to do. The reality is that there are people with ideological differences in this country, and those people work in institutions. The institutions say that we don't talk politics and don't talk about it in this place, or you may have to leave. But we know that the personal is political. We also know that people have to take their whole selves to work, and they take everything that's at work back home with them. And so we're trying to change the conversation around how individual employees can support the political realities of people's lives that may be their neighbors when they go home, but are their peers when they're at work. And so presenting them with opportunities to be educated about what is affecting their communities. If you go to work with, if you have a diverse workforce here in Chicago, if you do have a diverse workforce here in Chicago and you work for a company, the likelihood is that you work in a company that's diverse and live in a neighborhood that's not. Right.
Right.
And so the question of how you're voting has a lot to do with your colleagues' life and what the effect then from the company of their ability to take those wages home and how they spend them. So you have an African-American employee that you pay $60,000. You have a white employee that you pay $60,000. However, the African-American employee may live in somewhere like South Shore. The white employee may live in Lakeview. You're going to have a very different experience in how those wages are sent back home and what they have to pay for and what it takes for this person to sustain that job. And so advocacy groups are fighting to make sure that the playing field is equitable, not just equal, that it's equitable. And we're seeing from the federal government a lot of people that are saying we don't want to support these advocacy groups. We saw, when President Trump first came into office, one of the first things that they did was they rewrote the website for the Justice Department. Right? When it comes to civil rights and the advocacy groups that are fighting for civil rights, we saw the rewriting of a lot of the language. And so that's the second fight is language. They're targeting how people are able to talk. When we saw African Americans who were talking about state violence being labeled as black identity extremists, right? This is a tool to make sure that there's now a dog whistle to identify people who are standing up for their rights for justice as something that is against the state. And when it's against the state, for those who don't interrogate the state, they would say, well, that's not my job. I don't make the laws. I just follow them. Well, now you just identified a new person to be criminal. And all they did was say that their lives matter. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so we don't have the luxury of not paying attention to advocacy groups and supporting them.
But why would a corporation, what incentive do they have to bring these difficult conversations into the workplace?
The corporation itself doesn't have much incentive, but the employees do. So it's very rarely that I go to an institution and say the institution needs to change. More so, Justice Informed is solicited by people who work in institutions and are saying, hey, look, I've been here for a couple years and this isn't right. Or I don't feel like I want to work here much longer because of how I'm being treated. Or there are a lot of microaggressive situations that happen, and there's no space for me to talk about this, and the person in HR doesn't get it. Can we start with something low level like a anti-racism training? Right? Of course, I'm going to go in there and ask for something more ambitious. But the first thing that I want to make clear is that the majority of people that are asking for this change are the people who represent the effect of it not happening. And they are saying, hey, now I'm here and I have a voice. I'm working in this space. I was brought in the early 2000s under some diversity initiative, and I'm sick of it now. I want to have agency and I want to work in this place and feel that it's a place that respects me and engages me beyond just what I produce for them, but respects my humanity.
Absolutely. You have difficult conversation not only with leaders of corporations and employees of those corporations about how to better serve the diverse population there, but you reach
nonprofits.
And nonprofits. So nonprofits.
You cannot assume that just because people serve people of color, they know how to respect them.
Right.
You can't assume that.
But so this is the interesting conversation too, because even if as you think about the way we engage with corporations, with liberal organizations, there's this song and dance that kind of happens between, are these advocacy groups really fighting for, do they really believe in the people they're fighting for, and are they equipped to understand what they're going through? Because oftentimes, as you said, even nonprofits, the people at the head of them don't look like the communities they serve. Do you help to translate kind of what that meaning is? For
90% of my job is translation.
Is that frustrating though?
No.
That you have to translate? Okay.
No, that's the work. That's the work. That's what
Okay.
gets me up in the morning. That's what makes me excited. That people want to hear it in a different way. See, they could close their ears and close their eyes and shut their mouths like people have been doing, and saying that Black lives don't matter because all lives matter. That's been the going mantra in America since day one, right? But now people are willing to say, let me consider something else. And I think that gets me excited that people are willing to have that conversation. But again, I want to be very clear. That conversation is often one that happens through duress. There aren't as many as I would like. There aren't as many institutions that are saying we want to proactively engage this. When you look at what happened with Starbucks is one of the most proactive around inclusion. They're one of the most proactive major institutions in this country, but it still happened to them. And what their CEO did was very, very unprecedented in saying, I'm going to close all of our retail shops for a half-day training session on anti-racism. And then he issued a public statement to the 2 Black men who were arrested. Most companies would not fathom doing that, and legal would tell them don't do it. Because at the end of the day, like what Starbucks is seeing, there are a lot of customers who will say, you didn't have to do that. Why'd you do that? This wasn't even a big issue. And then there are other people who would say, congratulations, we're glad you did that. Thank you so much for speaking up.
Or you didn't go far enough.
And the real question for an institution is, but who are my shareholders? Mm-hmm. And usually the shareholders aren't the people who are getting arrested. They don't look like them. And that's part of when you're talking about song and dance, like that's the nimble tightrope that I'm finding executives in. Even if they have the heart and the desire and the ambition to do it, the legal liabilities of standing up and speaking still preclude them from engaging in a way that's as ambitious as they would like it to be. And so in that, I think that a lot of folks are painted with a broad brush, and they're not understanding that there are people who want to move this stuff forward. But the way the laws are set up, and then the way that we don't support people who do go out front, when there are corporations and there are people in institutions that run out front and say, no, I'm going to stand up for this, there's not an army of people who are willing to support them as much as there's an army of people who are willing to indict them. And that's on us. I didn't know every place where the governor was on these issues. I heard the stuff on screen, you know what I mean? Right. But in a closed conversation, it's very different. Right. And so I think it's always beneficial if you need to know. If you don't need to know, then it's not beneficial. At the same time, now he knows that business owners like me are in the state of Illinois, and I wanted him to know that. That there are businesses like me, and as I told him, there are people of my age group, the older millennials, the younger millennials, and now we got Gen Xers that are coming, that we don't want from business what you all have built businesses to be. And we're going to model and replicate and scale what businesses should be, because we are the ones who inherit this century. And that's what I was there to do, and that's what I did.
A large part of why he says people are leaving Illinois is because of the business opportunities.
Yeah, that's not true.
Or his ideas like thereof. And I mean, people are calling it an exodus mainly.
That's part of it. That's part of it.
Of the Black population. You call it a depopulation of the city of Chicago. First, why is it happening? And why do you call it a depopulation and not an exodus?
Yeah, so this is where we have to understand that the everyday person has to have a structural, an understanding and of structural analysis of racism and urban planning. They have to. The everyday, and this is what we're trying to push companies to just let us educate your people. We don't want to tell them how to vote. We don't want to tell them what to do, but we do want to educate them about what this is. So when you have a situation where for 20, 30 years, you send police into Black neighborhoods under the guise of the drug war, then you destroy the projects because you say that they're gang riddled, but you left people out of the workforce for dozens of years or excluded them out of the workforce and then criminalized them, which then put a stigma on them, not allowing them to go into the workforce, as you also didn't better fund and equip the EEOC, which was the vanguard, the police for the businesses that aren't employing people of diverse backgrounds. You're doing this all along the way, and that's not, when I say you're doing this, it's we are doing this. The government is us. Those of us who can vote, who have agency, it's us. We're allowing these things to happen. And as those things are happening, there's two positions that you put people in. If they have the means, they're going to flee. If they don't have the means, they're going to fight. That's where they're at. So, and when you have situations like, I'm from North Lawndale, where young people have to pick up guns to eat. Some of them pick up guns because they're just mad or whatever it may be. But when you have those situations, or the other best job is to pick up a gun and arrest somebody because they pay $72,000 after 18 months. You could be a Chicago police officer. Either way, you're living in the hood. You got to pick up a gun. You can go be an accountant, but the state isn't making it probable that you be an accountant because of the education system. Right? So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So to say it's an exodus, that people are leaving, you lit their house on fire and said they left. It makes no sense. They're not leaving. They're being forced out. And we knew that the land, when I lived in Cabrini Green, the land that Cabrini Green sat on when the plan for transformation happened with the Chicago Housing Authority, those people did not come back. When they tore down thousands of units of public housing where black families lived, and it is now top 15 neighborhoods to live in Chicago. They got a tower over by where I used to live in the Orange Doors called the Xavier. And it's $3,200 a month for 2-bedroom apartments that they never would have let us have when we were just poor folks living over there. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely.
This is not exodus. This is an extrication. That's like, it's like in the hood, it's not a lack of investment, it's divestment. Things are being taken.
Right.
And because the everyday person doesn't have a structural analysis of these things, they think it's just people choosing to leave.
Right.
Or people choosing to pick up a gun randomly, not knowing that because we didn't enforce labor market rules and the federal rules that were on the books, we were willing to send police into the hood. We weren't willing to send them into the companies.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes, yes.
This is the type of thing. And so it's saying if we're going to follow the law, then execute the law fully.